We love to roast people from other generations. OK Boomer took intergenerational jabbing by the helm a few years ago.
Okay, Boomer.
Mocking boomers in part for their tendency to mock millennials and Gen Z.
Today I think I'll talk about the ever so precious snowflake with a tender heart. Millennials, the generation of
Rivalries have also popped up amongst Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X regarding everything from pant preference to work culture to activism. Now, this intergenerational mockery isn't only entertaining, it's cathartic. You know, OK Boomer is propelled by anger and resentment towards older folks for leaving us with an increasingly uninhabitable world. But all of this intergenerational sniping is just one big distraction from the real forces destroying our planet and livelihoods. Because generations don't actually exist. They're more tools for data analysis or for understanding cultural changes over time than they are hard and fast distinctions. What's more, generations were manufactured to facilitate consumerism and negotiate power. And they do harm by undermining the intergenerational solidarity necessary to negotiate and repair conflict, as much in personal relationships as in global policy.
We're really sorry. We're leaving a big mess for you guys. And I just pray for you guys, pray for our children.
So let's start with why generations are made up constructs. You know, even the way we think of generations is weird. They're not fixed entities, but they're also not arbitrary distinctions. The Pew Research Center writes about how it decides its generational cutoffs for analytical purposes. They write, "We believe 1996 is a meaningful cutoff between millennials and Gen Z for a number of reasons, including key political, economic, and social factors that define the millennial generation's formative years." Now, in the US, every generational group in the last century has hovered around 15 years and was decided in context. So, for example, 9/11 and the 2008 recession are defining factors of my millennial generation since they happened during our formative years. I don't know about my other millennials, but 9/11, pretty formative and impactful. The 2008 recession, it scared me so much that I went to grad school and didn't leave until they made me. Now, these events altered social, political, and economic conditions, and it's therefore meaningful to demarcate a time period within which people experienced such events when they were most impressionable. Okay, before we get into it, I want to talk about this video sponsor, Magic Spoon. As I've been getting older, I've really been trying to cut down on sugar. It leaves me feeling sluggish and not my best self, and I know it's not good for me, which is why I'm super excited to tell you about Magic Spoon. Now, you may have already heard about their fantastic cereals, which I've eaten and enjoyed, but today I want to highlight a couple of their newer goodies, treats and granola. Now, their treats are crunchy, airy, and make the ideal snack on the go. These things contain 11 to 12 grams of protein, 1 gram of sugar, and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs. And their brand new high protein granola contains 13 grams of protein and 0 added sugar, and delicious flavors like honey almond and peanut butter. Now, out of all the new products, I really love the treats. Often when I'm working or driving or going to pick up my kid, it can be really hard to remember to have a snack, and knowing that these things are delicious and healthy makes me feel so much better. And of course, they're easy to toss in my bag and eat on the go. Now, if you want to check out this awesome new stuff from Magic Spoon, use code Wisecrack or click the link in the description to try Magic Spoon treats or granola today, and you'll get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their products that they're backed with a 100% happiness guarantee online. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll just refund your money. No questions asked. So click the link in the description, go to magicspoon.com/wisecrack, or just scan the QR code on the screen for $5 off. Now, back to the show. Now, Annalee Newitz argues that this kind of generational naming started around the 1920s with the birth of a distinct youth culture, writing, "Kids who had grown up with technologies like telephones, movies, and electric lights were accustomed to a radically different world than people who grew up with horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps. Times were changing so fast that each new generation seemed to grow up on a different planet from their elders." Speaking of technology and elders, this weekend I told my daughter that the TV only works when you're sick, because she was sick. So I let her watch some stuff on TV just to distract her. And then she started feeling better and she was like, "TV." And I was like, "Only works when you're sick." Maybe I'm actually f***ing her up because it's going to create a situation where she's going to want to be sick, like Munchausen's by proxy. And she'll create that just so she can watch TV. I'm a bad parent. In the years since, our consumerist economy has encouraged demarcating generations by products and spending habits.
A lot of you give millennials like me
or how much we love Harry Potter, saying things like, oh, your Harry Potter house is basically part of your personality, which shout out to my fellow Slytherins.
And this creates a prototype of each generation. But each prototype is designed to sell and appeal to the broadest group possible, and therefore is lacking in nuance. In a 2021 New Yorker piece, Louis Menand argues that prioritizing the year someone was born in order to understand them unfairly eclipses more revealing factors, such as economic conditions, gender, race and ethnicity, social class, and local community. He writes, a woman born to an immigrant family in San Antonio in 1947 had very different life chances from a white man born in San Francisco that year. Yet the baby boom prototype is a white male college student wearing striped bell bottoms and a peace button, just as the Gen Z prototype is a female high school student with spending money and an Instagram account. And because, unlike the author, I'm a friend of Gen Z, I know that it would be a TikTok account, not an Instagram account. For those of you who don't know, I'm officially the oldest member of Gen Z. Now, this example also reveals the racist tendency to characterize an entire generation by whatever trends are most commonly associated with white upper middle class consumers. Menand also references social scientist Bobby Duffy, author of The Generation Myth, Why When You're Born Matters Less Than You Think. He writes, boomers are narcissists, millennials are spoiled, Gen Zers are lazy. We assume people born around the same time have basically the same values. It makes for good headlines, but is it true? Menand said that one of Duffy's best points is that the most formative period for many people happens not in their school years, but once they enter the workforce. This is when they confront life-determining economic and social circumstances. Take the boomers. The oldest were born between 1946 and 1952, and by the time they entered the workforce, the economy was, well, booming. But when later born boomers entered it, Menand writes, the economy was a dumpster fire. It took longer for younger boomers to start a career or buy a house. People in that kind of situation are therefore likely to register in surveys as materialistic. But it's not the zeitgeist that's making them that way. It's just the business cycle. Our concepts of generations are closely linked to business cycles and economic factors, in other words, material conditions. And businesses profit off of stark changes in those conditions. Menand argues that youth culture creates a huge consumer base for everything new and sellable right now, from social media platforms to fashion. And this makes sense. Young people are always looking for a sense of identity, but the markets capitalize on this and thus perpetuate the concept of generation. Now, he writes, to keep this market churning and to give the consulting industry something to sell to firms trying to understand, i.e. increase the productivity of their younger workers, we've invented a concept that allows youth culture to be redefined periodically. This is the concept of the generation. But youth culture is not just organically created by the youth. There are ground up products or trends and styles that get established and popularized within each generation, but it's often older people marketing to the youth and doing research and deciding what they should sell them. There's an entire trend of YouTubers unpacking exactly what older generations have sold them as youth culture. Contemporaneous trends, styles, and media may pop into our heads when we imagine each generation, but Bobby Duffy posits that they are just window dressing. To understand generations, he says, it's more important to look at the socio-economic conditions surrounding them.
Why on earth would there be a Nintendo generation that's meaningful when you've got all these massive forces of a changing economy, changing home ownership, changing politics and culture more broadly?
So fixating on stereotypes about each generation is a real shame because it's distracting us from really big, true generational differences. And a lot of those are economic right now. Duffy goes on to discuss differences in wealth concentration, which are stark between the generations. Here in the US, when boomers were 45, they owned 42% of the country's total wealth. Generation X only owned 15s, and millennials, I feel like we own negative wealth. That's not a scientific or economic fact, but it feels like we own negative wealth, which I guess would be debt. So there is a concept for negative wealth. And sure, boomers have had more time, but there are other stark differences that contribute to the wealth gap, such as in home ownership. At age 30, 15% more boomers owned a home than millennials. Pair that with rising college costs, which almost triple what they were in the late 60s and early 70s. To add insult to injury, the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour has not been raised in 10 years. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, in 1968, a minimum wage worker earned 46% more, or the equivalent of $10.59 per hour in inflation-adjusted terms. All these gaps between older and younger generations in the US reveal monumentally different economic conditions that effectively mean we're living in different worlds. And by obscuring each generation's economic and material conditions, generational thinking makes each group seem like a whole different species of human. Now, we're obviously not, but these stereotypes make it easy to solidify in-groups and out-groups. which then offers each generation an identity of us versus them. And this is dangerous and unproductive because it stunts real-world problem solving. Now, take climate change, for example. Now, many boomers have profited off of industries that have led to climate degradation. In response, young people and the media have termed climate change a generational war, since it is, in fact, older people who have done the most damage and who can, in positions of power, encourage the most repair. But for regular people not in positions of power, Duffy shows that there is not as big a difference in concern about the environment between generations.
Things like climate change, we need people to come together. But what we're doing instead is artificially defining them across these generational and age-based lines.
In the same way that a Gen Zer might presume a boomer to be ignorant and uncaring about the climate, boomers have blamed younger generations for their lack of upward mobility. Now, younger folks have clapped back at them for this, rightly so, basically screaming, "It's not that we're inherently different from or lazier or worse with money than you, Dad." I'm just kidding, my dad's dead. And the New York Times estimates, based on median prices and average down payments, even if millennials assume the eating out habits of baby boomers, it would take around 113 years before they could afford a down payment on a home. It's helpful to look at these material conditions because false claims about entire groups of people can hamper cooperation and conflict resolution. Another example of this is in the workplace. Journalist Jessica Stillman argues that a real cause of generational conflict at work is not intergenerational work environments, but clumsy stereotypes about age groups. She highlighted studies that found that generational stereotypes do harm across the board. Quote, "Stereotypes about older people's ability to learn new tasks interfered with the training they received." Another study found mentorship went less well when the more experienced partner held stereotypes about the younger one's generation. It's not to say that workplaces shouldn't change or adapt to differences between people, just that they shouldn't do it because of preconceived notions drawn from generational stereotypes. In summary, she writes, "Please stop thinking in terms of generational conflict at work. Instead, see people as individuals and recognize that we all go through different life stages where we need more flexibility, support, or training depending on the circumstances." Now, there is a lot to be angry about in the world right now, as well as many people to blame. But we don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by blaming folks simply based on which generation they were born into. For example, Bernie Sanders, boomer, JD Vance, millennial. I'm just saying. And in fact, it seems like in many cases, working together across generational divides is a hallmark of everything from successful political organizing to fostering creativity and new artistic movements. Other cultural forces, like the community around my beloved Grateful Dead, are likely to have a multi-generational crowd, where many ages enjoy the same music and the same messages, and sometimes the same drugs. Of course, if you're gonna go no contact with that older family member, or you just can't do it anymore with your Gen Z cousin, we're not gonna say that you're wrong. All we're saying is that you'll likely find them intolerable, not just because of their age or generation. At the same time, our biggest hope for solving many of our most pressing issues requires working collectively. And to do so, it might be best to detach frustrations from entire age groups and instead channel them towards those who are actually responsible. To quote 18-year-old Christopher Mezer, who was asked about the OK Boomer trend, "We're not taking a jab at boomers as a whole. We're not going for their lives. If it's a jab at anyone, it's outdated political figures who try to run our lives." Couldn't have put it better myself, Christopher. That's all for this one. Let us know what you think in the comments. A huge shout out to all of our patrons. If you're interested in getting our videos early with no ads and a bunch of other extra perks, please do click the link in the description and check it out. And if you haven't, do subscribe, ring that bell, like the video. It all helps us out. In the meantime, know that it's not generations you should be mad at, just particular people. So focus on them instead. And I'll see you next time.